Growing up on this planet, you hear and see beautiful and ugly things about people on this planet. This is an ugly story based on actual events that took place and two persons' poor decisions. This story's outcome could have been prevented if a moral decision had been made initially. The roommate. Living on the west side of Cleveland, Ohio, I owned a tiny house in the 1960s. Jobs were hard to find in Cleveland, and even when you did have a job, the pay was low. Since I had 2 bedrooms, I decided to rent the extra bedroom out. I placed ads in the Cleveland Press and the Cleveland Plain Dealer. I received several calls, but none wanted to pay the rent. I asked for $55 a month. Then I received a call from a young man who seemed to be around my age. I turned 30 a few months ago and thought we would have much in common. His name was Paul, and I was John. Paul seemed like a nice guy, very polite and quiet, and agreed to the rent amount since he had an excellent paying job. He moved in 2 days later with just a few clothes and a radio alarm clock. I told him to help himself with any food, but please wash any dishes he would use. We agreed to share grocery costs, yard work, and utility bills. Everything was going great for 9 months, and I noticed changes in Paul. I saw he loved going to bars and taverns. He liked to drink Black Label beer and smoked Lucky Strike cigarettes, but he loved picking up women for one-night stands. He would bring the woman home at least twice a week, and they were always different sizes and ages. After about 1 year of living in my house, he brought an older woman home several times. Her name was Margie, but this woman was different. She was well-dressed, with fancy jewelry and hair well done, and she had a lovely new red Cadillac. The worst part was that she was married. They seemed to love each other very much and dated for another 6 months. It was getting close to Christmas, and a recent snowstorm buried the city. They kept dating and, at times, parked in alleys to make out. Christmas came and passed, but rumors were that her husband was catching on to her cheating. They seemed extremely nervous about this, almost scared. It seemed her husband had connections to the Cleveland mob. They still snuck around to see each other, but always looked over their shoulder to see if they had a car following them. It was now New Year's Eve. A neighborhood Dalmatian dog named Dancer would go house to house begging for food. He was a sweet dog, and I always gave him food, so he came around daily. On New Year's Eve night, I stayed home to watch Guy Lombardo on the television. Paul and Margie went out to celebrate. They decided to park in the alley behind the bar on that cold, snowy night. They started making out as usual when suddenly, the passenger door flew open where Paul was sitting. Margie had decided to drive. It was Margie's husband, and he had a gun and was screaming, "You SOB, you have been screwing my wife." Paul was so scared that he urinated in his pants. Margie's husband was Joey Big Ears Pisano, a hitman for the Cleveland mob. Joey put the gun against Paul's head and said, "You had your last screwing with my wife, you SOB." Joey then pulled the trigger. Blam! Paul's skull fragments, blood, and brains splattered all over Margie, who was dressed to the nines and was screaming, "No, don't shoot me, please." Joey said, "Bitch, just clean the car before you come home." Joey pulled the body out of the car, onto the snow, and walked away. At the same time as the shot was fired, I could hear a dog barking and running around my house like he was chasing someone. But no one was there. After running, circling the house about 6 times, he stopped at the side door of my house crying and growling. When I opened the door, his eyes were bugging out of his head. His fur stood straight up on his back, his tail between his legs. I believe Dancer, the dog, was chasing Paul's spirit until the spirit entered the house. After a few days, Dancer was back begging for food. I began searching for a new roommate, never saw Margie again, and Paul was buried 6 feet under at Holy Cross Cemetery. Written by Alvin Rivera.